Piece of a little bit before we get to tonight's news, some of it, that from last time, even though, well, it got repeated, a piece of it, a variation of it tonight. And that is, ordinary minds believe that if you make note of something, that you have a personal opinion of it, because if they do, they do. And I was going to give, rather than that being an all-encompassing truism, which it is, I just want you to consider, off on your own if you haven't already, you're surrounded by an endless string of examples. Let's start at the hormonal level, which is where everything does start. If you made a comment, if you started to say something about food, the ordinary mind is immediately going to believe that you are about to make some critique of a restaurant. Some variation there. That is what it will believe, because the ordinary mind is not prepared to even consider the fact that you were about to talk, point out something about the nature of food. The ordinary mind, when it hears something that would have, comparably speaking, more of a potential universal basis, such as eating, it immediately assumes that there is a subset to it, which is what oftentimes we're referring here as the local version of it. And it's always a subset of reality. And so if you said something, if you start talking about food, I'm hoping you're hearing this. I was trying to use something different than what might appear to be the more obvious, like religion and morality and politics and all that. If you just talk about food, I was trying to get down to a crude level. The reason I'm stopping now, it looks so many blank looks. If you started talking about in some way food, and someone else was listening, you had some sort of audience for this, and someone listening to it, just another ordinary sane person, they would have no doubt, although they do not analyze in advance because they don't analyze anything, but if you suddenly stopped and said, have you got any idea what I'm getting at when I bring up the idea of food? They would have to, it might take a few minutes for them to run through several possibilities, but they would have to finally get, assuming that they were sane and assume that you were making some sane attempt at an observation, that you were coming down somewhere to a critique of a restaurant. Or it could be a packaged food, you understand? I'm just using that allegorically. But the mind must operate at that level on the basis that there is going to be a local version of whatever you're talking about. And food, comparably speaking, would be universal to a man, because a man could do without art, a man could do without books, a man can be illiterate, but he cannot do without food. So on that basis, even man, not just universally in the physical sense of our cosmos, but universally, food is a constant, an inescapable constant. But the mind must operate, it immediately does, on the basis that there's got to be a subset to this. That you're not talking about food in general, because the mind is not wired up to consider food in general. Well, what are you going to say about food in general? And if you start trying to talk to an ordinary person about food in general as though it had some great or wider metaphorical, symbolic, allegorical purpose, it wouldn't take them long to decide, well, you seem to have maybe a glib tongue, but Jesus, somewhere you got a screw loose. What the hell are you talking about? What? Food's food. Now, if you're going to talk about something specific, like, I thought you were going to give me some advice like you just ate at a new restaurant that sucked, or had some great new dishes somewhere, or maybe food that somebody claims is good for your brain or will straighten your liver out after years of drinking, or something specific. But the mind cannot take, which is where all this started, remember, that if you try to point out something, if you try to make note of something, put all that in quotation marks, just make note, point out, and you start trying to talk to ordinary minds, including yourself, they immediately, irrepressibly, accept the fact that you have an opinion, a critique, a view, a partisan, weighted thought about what you're about to talk about. And for one very good reason, because if they do, they do. Who in the world is prepared, interested, needs to hear some sort of observation about food? Of course, it's just one step. If you can get that, I was pausing to let you. One step past that to being alive. People say, well, I would like to hear that, but specifically, what are you going to talk about being alive? Like, how to make more money, how to lose weight. If you say, well, no, I'm just going to try to talk about being alive. No, grammatically it makes sense. But I assume that you will not give up your day job to start making such lectures and waiting for people to show up. You're just going to talk about eating, being alive, being a person. Yeah. But they keep waiting. Well, what? The subset, the local version of it. I'm not going to. What do I want to hear about being alive? Specifically, what? What area? Financial, personal, sexual, fashionable, artistical, transportational? What? It is easy, in a sense, to make it sound as though, whether it was on this basis, in this particular area or not, to attack people's opinion. You could say, well, you could even try verbally to say, well, there's a difference between knowing something and having an opinion about it, which is easy to say and nobody can do anything with it, because you can slap anybody upside the face with that like a wet carp. And they go, well, because they can't deny it. All they can do is say, well, I agree. And you can say, is that your opinion or a fact? No, a fact. Oh, yes, there's no doubt. I know that was fast, but we don't have time to stop and scale it. But to take a pejorative view of a man's opinion, to say, well, everyone's opinion is biased, everyone's opinion is short-viewed, yes, nearsighted, myopic, partisan, prejudiced, yes. So what else is new? And if you try to tell an ordinary person, if you tried to point that out and say, well, there's got to be a difference between that and, quote, big old quotes, real knowledge, objective knowledge. Everyone on this planet who is sane will go, here, right on. Except do not try to follow up and say, well, why do you say that? Because from that view, what you could call other people's opinion, that is the extent of human thought. It's not simply an attack. And so to say that if you attempt to make note of something, ordinary minds will assume that you have an opinion. That sounds as though, well, they're already putting their foot in it because they're just going to assume that you got some kind of one-eyed, prejudiced, half-baked opinion rather than some absolute information about something. Which, in case you never thought about it that way, is one of the purposes of one form of human institutions, education, and them passing out degrees. Because that is supposed to, they don't necessarily analyze it that way, but that is supposed to represent that there is some distinction between you and simply a man running around with an opinion. Because a guy could be staying down, some guy that does damn drywall work on the weekend for his brother-in-law could be staying around a bar drinking cheap beer and saying, I'll tell you what, I believe that there's more to that which influences a man's psychology than the mere fact of Darwinian determinalism. The evolution of the fittest. And we could say, well, that sounds pretty interesting. And then suddenly another man pops up and he says more or less the same thing. And you say, well, that guy just said it. And the second man says, and he pulls out his billfold and he has a reduced little photocopy of his degree in psychology from a reputable institution. That literally is one of the ways to distinguish. This is kind of a form of the old one about why do psychiatrists wear those white smocks around mental hospitals when they're not going to get any blood on them. It's quite simple. It's so you can tell the patients from the people running it. You have degrees because, well, it's not just a joke. It's not just cynical. It shows, well, wait a minute. Somebody could be having the same opinion as the world famous Nobel, maybe not Nobel, a distinguished psychiatrist, and with an expertise in a certain area, sexual dysfunctions in a single family setting. And he has some opinion, and he expresses his opinion, you go, huh? And then suddenly somebody sitting next to you at the lecture says, I got a brother-in-law that's a plumber. I thought he was in drywall. Well, he plumbs some too. And he said the same thing last weekend. We were out drinking, fishing, and he said that same thing. The same exact words. But see, there's got to be a difference. And if you tried to stand up and say, wait a minute, this man here says that his brother, who's a plumber, finished the 7th grade, said the exact same thing you did, doctor, last weekend. And the doctor says, and what's his credentials? You say, well, he didn't finish grammar school. Well, you see where it's going. There's proof. This man spent, to take that one example, which is not as cynical as an ordinary mind might believe, is that we have now proof. We have institutional, that is collective proof, that this man spent 12 years of extended study to back up this opinion. Now, it's the same words that your brother-in-law, or this guy's brother-in-law, said, but there's a difference. Everybody understands that if you're ordinary. It's the same words, but there's a difference between some guy sitting out there in a rowboat drinking fishing beer and going, well, it seems to me. And he says something about the nature of human nature, and you go, yes. And then you hear it the next week that you paid $10 to hear this world-famous psychiatrist, and the conclusion is the same thing. But there is a difference, and you know it. You don't laugh about it. But there is the proof. 12 years right there on the wall. Now, this is not some opinion people I have, the man says, a psychiatrist. Hey, I graduated from, Berkeley. Look right there, 12 years. It's not just some opinion. When I say something, it's not simply just a passing opinion in the whole world, civilized world. Well, that's true, because you got to. What appears to be the difference between opinion and knowledge, what I was trying to get you to see is, in the finest sense of the word, is at best illusionary. It is part of a collective acceptance of an illusion. It is an acceptance, I don't mean an illusion as a delusion. It's an illusion in the sense that it's pretend. In the same way that we all pretend that we're sane. I mean, you pretend that you took a shower and you cleaned up, and you pretend that you go and clean underwear. Who knows? You pretend that you're fairly as decent as you look, that you smile and you, hello, how are you? You pretend, when inside you're a mad dog killer. Just continually, just one breath away from some kind of mass mayhem against your fellow man. Just the fear of extended time in prison or stiff fines. The only thing that keeps you from killing people and running amok in the streets. So it's that kind of illusion, I mean. But note that the human mind, yours and everyone else's, at the ordinary collective, civilized level, is simply, it's not all that, for me to keep laying on, it's not all that deep and heavy. It is so right at the surface and point blank in your face is why you can't normally think about it in that way. Is that the mind is not set up under ordinary conditions to ponder, to even hear a non-partisan noting of something. Now, it almost doesn't exist and all that, but even if it comes somewhere close to existing, back to the example, maybe it makes a little more sense now. If you start talking about food, and however you got started, you started with a joke or you started with something that got somebody's attention, either one person or an audience of people, and they go, oh, and so they start listening, and you continue to apparently be talking about food. And they assume there's a punchline coming. Not just a humorous sense, but that there is some point to this. Or why else would you bring it up? They assume there's some point, or why would they even be interested? So they listen and they listen. But my example, what I was trying to narrow it down to put flesh on it, is they will assume, properly so, that you're getting down to the point of critiquing some particular restaurant, some particular brand of food. But if you just leave it that you started talking about food in general and you got them going, and you never left that, you'll lose them very quickly. They will be completely ill-satisfied. Well, what was the point of that? And they won't hear it. And where was the conclusion to that? Why did you bring up food unless you were going to pick on somebody, unless you had some opinion to express? I might not agree with it, but at least, what was this? I sit here and listen to you for 5 minutes or 2 hours or what it was, and people feel like I have been run out on some kind of tightrope that wasn't tied to anything. And you got me out there, and it just suddenly, my knees got weak, I got bored, I got dizzy, and I kept thinking, what the hell is this? What kind of trick is this? Which is kind of getting off the subject, but that's one of the closest that people's ever come to dealing with hearing information like this. I don't mean just right here and now, but throughout the ages, is people, kind of strangers, can wander into this kind of news show and wander off, and about the best they can say is, that's some kind of trick, Herbert. And Herbert will say, well, exactly to what avail, to what purpose? I don't know, but it's a goddamn trick. That's about all they can say, which is what I was trying to convey. It's like, well, the people ran me out on some kind of intellectual tightrope, and I went out there and I listened. It was interesting, and then it was not interesting. I kept my balance. I went on and on. And so I looked around, it wasn't tied to a goddamn thing. And then they just sort of quit. And the show went off, and the guy said, well, I got to go, or he just turned around and left. And I was just kind of hanging there, and I thought, well, I invested, an hour of my life in this. And he never get around to saying, don't eat at that restaurant. All of that, if you recall, is back to what I was trying to point out, that it is sort of an archetypical example of the ridiculous to say that somebody could teach or in any way help somebody else think for themselves, because it can't be done. It's ridiculous to say that. So when I talk about it, but it is a combination offer. It is a kind of invisible fencing that confines man. And I don't mean in just some negative sense. It comforts man. It keeps man collectively sane, in the same way that a herd can be held somewhere safe instead of them all running amok and out falling off of cliffs and getting caught in bramble bushes. And the kind of confining is that you can't think for yourself unless you have some kind of nonpartisan, extraordinary notion of what life's about, outside of your own brain, just what everything's going on. And unless you already in some way have some non-routine notion of what's going on out there, you can't even begin to think for yourself. You can say you can punch somebody in the nose that would disagree with it, but you can't. In other words, you can't get to A until you pass B, and you can't get to B until you pass A. That's the way it seems. And one of the reasons it seems that way, to try and wrap this up, is exactly what I'm saying. If you deal with the human mind and say, well, let's take note of this, and you start thinking about so-and-so just on your own, forget you and somebody else, and you start thinking, and your mind goes, yeah. Well, notice the difficulty in doing it, because you go, yeah, well, what is it I'm about to think about? I think I'll just keep on thinking. No. And of course, the weight of gravity, the dynamics of electrochemical energy on this planet is such that an ordinary person don't have to put up with that crap. You simply get distracted. Well, you simply get distracted if you try to. If you tried to trick somebody, or if you tried to tell somebody this could be an interesting intellectual experiment, just try it. Just try it and see if it doesn't strengthen your mind. And you get somebody, and you say, next time you start thinking about something that interests you, you hear something on the radio or somebody says something that interests you, and you start thinking, try to notice right quick what it is you'd normally think, and then try not to think it. Try not to think just the opposite. Try not to think, well, I'm wrong. Just try to think something else. And you can get somebody to go, all right, I can hear that. And so they try it, assuming they could remember it all. And so they try it the next day. They're going to try it, should we be charitable and say 2 or 3 seconds? And literally, it's almost like a form of gridlock. Except they don't have to deal with the fact that they can't do it. It's suddenly, oh, there's the phone. What? Jesus, God damn. Something bite me? You didn't follow that? You don't have to put up with trying to be strung out there on a tightrope that has no end. God is hot. Oh, this is not just a joke. This is hormones back at work. That neurons get too upset. That's all you got to do. And you don't know why. You can suddenly go, well, I still feel like you miss it. What if we were playing this kind of game that you could be a mind reader and you get this person, this imaginary person, that you get them to go home tomorrow and try this, what we just described, as an experiment. That it could strengthen your mind. They go, all right, that when you start to think about something, next time you hear, what interests you, and they say politics, right? Next time you hear those kind of buzzwords that makes you think a certain way, all right, just, it's like strengthening, like doing, curls for your bicep. Here's something you can do for your brain. You're normally in favor of that kind of political opinion, yeah? All right, try not to think that. Okay, you want me to think the opposite? No, not so fast. Not just the opposite. Okay, what? Try not to think either one, but still consider the matter. Like you're taking note of politics, but don't think this and don't think not this. Try not to fall into the subcategory having an opinion. Try to think something else. Okay, I'll try that. So next day he's trying it. We'll pretend he's trying it. Do you understand the saving power and grace and beauty of habit? Habitual motor skills, as I think psychologists like to call them. I've been calling it hormonal activity as opposed to neural. So the man hears a word, conservative, left-wing, Whig, royalist, secessionist. And he goes, and he remembers this, and he goes, wait a minute, I won't think, no, and I won't think just the opposite. I won't think I'm wrong. Let's see, what was it? Not to try and think about it and not have a critique, not to think of a restaurant, just think of food. And all right, I'll try. You still don't get it? You have saved your neural ass. You have saved the bacon throughout your life. If you're 30 years, you've saved it for at least 30 years. If you're 50, you've saved it for probably 49 of doing this. When you can't think good, when the brain has got to do this, it's normally referred to as just habits, gestures, tics, just nothing. But if we were there and the man's trying not to think about something and suddenly we see his brain, he's trying. And you can be a mind reader and you can tell what he's doing. He's trying to think about food, about politics, without critiquing a particular party, without critiquing a particular restaurant. So he's trying, and his brain is just on the verge of his brakes and everything just... And what happens? The body will save you. It'll do it every time. You don't have to just do this. You can be suddenly your heart about to be broken. A tragedy happened in your life. Somebody tell you that somebody that you love, a family member, somebody's died or something. And suddenly you feel like, my brain is going to explode. I can't stand this. And what will happen? You don't normally notice it because it seems small, but what I've been going through here. You can hear something or think about something. I don't want to hear that. And it's almost as though the neural system at that end can't stand it. And you'll start going stuff like. And I guess ordinarily you might think, well, that has no particular purpose, or maybe people's watched too many movies, or maybe all of human nature that people do things like when they feel bad. That doesn't really matter. I mean, I was doing that because if you just heard bad news, people might do. That's the kind of thing I guess actors might do, is go, like Jesus. But it doesn't have to be that. All it's got to be is, there you are trying to do something unnaturally in a neural sense, and it's just about to freeze up the brain, and you'll go, and we can say, what the hell did you do that for? You were about to think. You were about to get past the point of being in favor of this or that. And you went, well, hell, my itched. Because if you could read minds, like the old ideas in movies, you'd see that the electrical neural system, the lightning, almost hit his goof field, and it's like it was about to stop in midair. Almost anything. What the hell did you do that for? You were about to do something and you rubbed your, well, my eye itch. What the hell did you want me to do? I mean, it just kind of, I did it. Yeah, but you messed up. You had it kind of, what do you mean I had it kind of? You're on the verge of not either being for or against that restaurant. You're almost beyond the form of mid-air criticism. You're almost holding it there. Well, I don't know. I was trying what you said. Yeah, I was trying. I don't know. Well, you ruined it. What do you mean I ruined it? Well, you were right there. It was a split second that you were almost down the tightrope, not tied to anything, and you ruined it. What do you mean I ruined it? Well, you suddenly went, well, I edged. If it hadn't been that, it would have been, or it would have been. It doesn't have to be that dramatic. All it has to be is hormones. The physical, instinct, and safety valve of collective, herd, motor instincts will always save your bacon, neurally. Because if you don't know what else to do next, what do you do? If you don't know what to do next neurally, what do you do? Well, this is fairly subtle. When it really gets a little more aggressive, when people don't know what to do neurally, what do they do? When it's two people, they'll punch the other guy. Whole groups of people will punch the other guy. It's like an international, cosmic debating contest that is simply the byplay, the necessary binary byplay of electrical chemical energy that runs things, but it amounts to, it's like a debate going on between you and somebody else. We're talking about the same thing if you'll follow right quick, and it's like the other person, let's say, they bring up an argument that almost leaves you in thin air. That you went, well, blah, 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 blah. And that's the other guy, and he goes, well, but consider this. And he goes, blah, 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 blah. I mean, it sounds like an old joke, but it goes on all the time. That is the extreme overt form, but you do it to yourself. But men literally would do it to each other. Whole groups, that they're almost left in midair. That they present their best argument, whatever it is, and another person says, ah. They parry with this, and they go, ah, but consider this. And you listen. And you try all the minor things I just did. So they did this, and it almost ruined you. You're left. And none of this seems to work. And you hit the son of a bitch. That is the same thing as what I'm describing of a man attempting to do it to himself, like, well, I will not take either position. I'll try to do that for an experiment, what you said, of just kind of hanging thin air. This is a variation of hitting somebody else. You're just doing it to yourself. And he's there, you know what to do, and you go, in case you never thought about it, history is replete with stories. They don't know what they're doing. The ultimate purpose is not pursued, but of all sorts of physical, everything from yoga, all kinds of meditation positions of sitting, and what they're attempting to do is interfere. They can come up with all kinds, but they're attempting to interfere, kind of working out backwards of what I'm talking about, that if the mind got to a place that could almost do something new, what you're inclined to do, and they don't look at it this way, is that you, to do exactly what I'm saying. So, wait a minute, what if I just got in one position and I refused to let myself move? Then that would eventually make my mind not move. Well, yeah. Assuming if it gets hot enough and it rains hard enough that you can run things backward and suddenly out of wheat fields would suddenly leap up freshly wrapped loaves of bread. They just leap out and you catch them in your arms. Well, is it all gone? Okay.